This is the tutorial for Concept 13, Skill 3, Midpoints and Bisectors. So looking at some vocabulary here, it talks about how a line segment is formed by two endpoints and all points between them. So when we're talking about a line segment, it ends. So it ends at A and ends at B. So typically a line goes on forever. And so if we were to show a line, remember how we have the arrows at the end symbolizing it goes on forever. But a line segment doesn't. And it definitely has defined endpoints. And so if I was to use a notation, I use the notation AB. And notice that the hat on top is just a line segment with no arrows symbolizing that it goes on forever. So this definitely ends at A and ends at B. The midpoint of a segment is divided into two equal parts. And the two segments or two parts are congruent segments. And so those are symbolized by a tick mark. And you can barely see it, so I'm going to darken it up a little bit. So if I go ahead and draw a little mark right here and a little mark right here, you can see those marks were there. And what those symbolize is that those are equal. So it basically says that AM is congruent to BM. So remember, congruent means same size and same shape. So same shape because they're both lines, same size means they're the same length in length and distance. So A to M is the same as M to B. And if that's the case, because those tick marks are the same, if that's the case, then M is the midpoint of AB. And so from there, we've also got a bisector. So a bisector is something that splits two lines in half. And so EF is the bisector of KL. So if we look at KL, EF bisects it. So what that line does is it splits it into two equal parts. So bisector goes through the midpoint. And so again, that bisector goes through that midpoint, and so that way we can also find the midpoint. So KM is congruent to ML, because again, that's the midpoint. You can even see this little line right here and this tick mark right here. Again, that symbolizes that KM is congruent to ML. So the midpoint XY is U, and then it says WZ, so WZ is here, is perpendicular to XY. So again, perpendicular means that it makes a right angle. And so we would actually have four right angles in here. And so that's 90 degrees. And so if KZ, it bisects XY and is perpendicular, then we've got another name called a perpendicular bisector. So we're going to use these terms in today's examples. So let's go ahead and take a look at those problems. And it says, use the figure to name a line segment. So there's could be lots of line segments here. Line segments could be ML. So let's go ahead and label line segments. We've got lots of different possibilities here. So we have LO, and again, you can also go OL would be the same thing. ON, that's a line segment. We also have LN, that's a line segment. Notice the hat that I put on top doesn't have the arrows. And then we have PO, we would have OM, and we also have PM. So lots of different line segments there that we could have named. And then we're supposed to name two congruent segments. Well, congruent segments, so we use the congruent symbol, has the equal sign, then the similar symbol. So congruent segments. And so when we're looking for the congruent segments, we're looking for the tick marks. And so I see the tick marks right here. This mark right here and this mark here symbolize that these two line segments are congruent. So we would say LO is congruent to ON. And again, if you had the other order, OL or NO, those would be the same exact lines. NO is the same as ON. So we've done those two parts. Let's look at the next one. It says a midpoint. Well, if these two are congruent, so if LO is congruent to ON, then O is the midpoint. So the midpoint is equal to O. And then a bisector. Well, a bisector cuts this line segment in half. And so we would say a bisector would be PM, or MP. So that's an example there. Let's take a look at some other problems. It says use the figure to name each of the following. So we need to name a line segment. Again, there's lots of different possibilities. Remember, the arrows symbolize that it goes on forever. However, if we say, instead of WZ with the hat of the line, if we just put the line segment like that, that represents a line segment. So that says that I'm just going from W to Z, even though it has arrows at the end. Now, if I was to show the line WZ, then I would put the arrows at the end like this. But that's not the same thing as line segment. So this is line WZ, but line segment WZ just has the hat without the arrows. So then we'd also have WX, we could have XY, we could have ZY, we could have ZM, we could have MX, we could even have ZX. So those are some line segments. Now they want a midpoint. So the midpoint has to be the middle of a line. So we look for the tick marks. So I see this tick mark here and this tick mark here, and that means that XM is the same as MZ. So the midpoint would only be M. Two congruent segments. Well, again, the tick marks tell us the congruent segments. So we'd have ZM as one congruent segment, and that is congruent to MX. So those are types of problems that you'll see for that skill. Good luck.